29 square miles in 7 days, not in a week of dramatic breakthrough operations, not following a major Ukrainian offensive with Western-supplied armor and air support. In 7 days of what Ukraine's military calls active defense, a form of warfare that has no precise parallel in modern military doctrine because it has been invented, refined, and proven under the specific conditions of this specific conflict. According to Russia Matters analysis of Institute for the Study of War battlefield data for the week of May 12 to May 19, 2026, Russian forces suffered a net loss of 29 square miles of Ukrainian territory. The previous week they lost another 12 square miles. The 4-week total, from April 21 to May 19, is 69 square miles, the largest sustained net territorial reversal Russia has experienced since the beginning of 2024. And Zelensky has said, in the nightly addresses and the international briefings and the bilateral conversations with allied leaders that define the diplomatic rhythm of his wartime leadership, that he knows exactly what happens next. Tonight we examine what 29 square miles in 1 week actually means for the military situation on the ground. We examine the specific operational factors that have produced this reversal: the drone warfare, the deep strike campaign, the active defense doctrine that Zelensky described to NATO allies in Brussels as allowing Ukraine to wear down the enemy, regain ground, and inflict maximum losses. We examine what Russia's response to this territorial loss tells us about the state of its military decision-making. And we examine what Zelensky knows about what happens next, because his actions over the past 3 weeks are the clearest possible statement of his expectations. 29 square miles in 1 week. Let us put that in context. For much of 2024 and early 2025, Russia was advancing at a pace of close to 10 square kilometers per day across the front line. The Donetsk front was under severe pressure. Ukrainian forces were conducting a fighting withdrawal from Avdiivka. Russian forces were grinding forward toward Pokrovsk, toward Chasiv Yar, toward the logistical nodes that sustain Ukraine's eastern defense. Western analysts, looking at the daily territorial change data, were concerned about the trajectory. Then the pace began to slow. 7 square kilometers per day, then 5, then 3, then 2. Then, in the week of May 12 to 19th, net negative, Russia losing 29 square miles more than it gained. What produced this reversal? The answer is not a single factor. It is a combination of factors that have been building simultaneously throughout 2025 and into 2026, each reinforcing the others. The first is the casualty rate. Russia has been losing more than 1,000 soldiers per day, killed and wounded, for an extended period. Commander-in-Chief Zelensky told NATO allies on May 20th that Russia has lost more than 141,500 personnel since the beginning of 2026 alone, of whom more than 83,000 were killed. Since January 1st, 2026. In less than 5 months. At this rate, Russia is consuming roughly 900 soldiers per day in killed and wounded, and Zelensky added, critically, that Russia is losing more personnel than it can mobilize. The recruitment pipeline cannot keep pace with the loss rate. An army that cannot replace its losses cannot maintain the offensive operational tempo required to generate territorial advances. The 29 square miles lost in a week is the territorial expression of a casualty rate that has exceeded Russia's capacity for replacement. The second factor is Ukraine's drone warfare capability. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces have developed, under wartime conditions, at a pace of innovation that has no parallel in peacetime defense procurement, a drone warfare capability that has fundamentally changed the cost of Russian assault operations on the front line. Surveillance drones provide real-time targeting data for artillery and strike drones. FPV attack drones are deployed in networked swarms that can be directed to any detected movement within seconds. Russian armored vehicles, which in the early months of the war could advance under artillery cover with some reasonable expectation of reaching Ukrainian positions, now face an aerial threat environment that makes any movement visible, and any visible movement potentially lethal, within a time window that no armored vehicle can reliably escape. The effect on Russian assault operations is documented in the casualty figures. Russian forces are sustaining the losses that a high-intensity assault against effective drone defenses generates. Those losses exceed what can be replaced. The territorial consequence is 29 square miles of net loss in a single week. The third factor is Ukraine's deep strike campaign against Russian rear area infrastructure. Every Russian ammunition depot struck, every fuel pumping station hit, every military logistics hub destroyed behind Russian lines is a constraint on the ability of Russian frontline units to sustain the pace of assault operations that territorial advance requires. The Moscow drone strikes, the Orenburg gas field operations, the systematic targeting of Russian military-industrial nodes across hundreds of kilometers of Russian territory, all of these operations are connected to the frontline territorial numbers through the logistics chain that supplies Russian assault units. Degrade that supply chain, and you degrade the capacity for assault. Degrade the capacity for assault, and the territorial balance moves in Ukraine's direction. Now let us examine what Russia is doing in response to losing 29 square miles in a week. Because Russia's response is as revealing as the territorial loss itself. Russia is not pausing. It is not reconsidering. It is not adjusting its operational approach in response to the evidence that its current approach is generating net territorial losses at the worst rate in over a year. Russia launched 839 attacks on 53 settlements in the Zaporizhia region alone on May 21st. Russia is conducting nuclear weapons drills in Belarus. Russia has loaded missile warheads with depleted uranium. Russia has deployed 640,000 troops to the Ukrainian theater, more than at any previous point in the war. Russia is recruiting university students through a system of coercive false promises to try to replace the losses that are driving the territorial reversal. This is not the behavior of a military command that is recalibrating. It is the behavior of a military command that has decided to try to overwhelm Ukraine through volume. More attacks, more drones, more soldiers, more pressure, in the hope that the sheer weight of sustained assault will produce breakthrough, even as the territorial balance moves against it. And Zelensky knows what happens next. He knows because he has the intelligence, from his own services, from allies like Estonia's Kaupo Rosen, from Russia's own leaked internal documents, that shows the trajectory of Russia's military and economic position. He knows that Russia is losing more soldiers than it can recruit. He knows that Russia's federal deficit has reached $80 billion in the first months of 2026. He knows that 400 Russian oil wells have been shut down, potentially permanently, under the combined pressure of sanctions and his deep strike campaign. He knows that Russia's regional budgets are going bankrupt. He knows that the 29 square miles lost in the past week are not an accident. They are the territorial expression of a military, economic, and industrial trajectory that is moving consistently against Russia, and that will continue to move against Russia as long as the pressure is maintained. What happens next, in Zelensky's understanding of this war, is more of the same, but more intense. More drone strikes on Russian military-industrial infrastructure, more deep operations at increasing range, more domestically produced weapons that reduce Ukraine's dependency on foreign supply chains, more active defense on the front line that generates the casualty rates that are driving Russia's territorial losses, and more pressure on Western governments through intelligence disclosures, through speeches at NATO councils, through the public presentation of the casualty figures and the territorial numbers and the economic data from Russia's own classified files, to maintain the support that makes this trajectory possible. Russia lost 29 square miles in 1 week. Zelensky knows exactly what happens next. He is already making it happen. There is something important to understand about what 29 square miles in a week represents in terms of the human cost on both sides, because the territorial number is not just a strategic indicator, it is a human one. For Ukraine, 29 net square miles of territory recovered means towns and villages where people may eventually be able to return. It means Ukrainian families who fled months or years ago seeing, on maps and in news reports, that the front line has moved away from their homes. It means communities that were under Russian military control, subject to Russian occupation policies, to the suppression of Ukrainian language and culture, to the systematic documentation and interrogation of residents that Russia's occupation administrations have conducted throughout occupied Ukrainian territory, moving back toward the possibility of Ukrainian governance and Ukrainian life. For Russia, 29 net square miles lost in a week means something different. It means units that were ordered to hold specific positions and failed. It means commanders who must explain to their superiors why the line moved in the wrong direction. It means soldiers who died to hold ground that was subsequently lost, whose deaths did not achieve the tactical objective for which they were expended. It means the gap between Russia's public narrative of inevitable victory and the documented reality of territorial loss becoming incrementally harder to manage. Zelensky told NATO allies in Brussels that Russia is losing more personnel than it can mobilize. The 29 square miles is the territorial consequence of that loss rate, the physical manifestation on a map of what happens when an army is consuming soldiers faster than it can replace them and cannot maintain the assault tempo required to generate territorial advance. Zelensky knows exactly what happens next. And what happens next is more of this. More territorial recovery, more pressure on Russia's manpower and logistics, more deep strikes that degrade Russia's capacity to sustain the assault tempo that would be required to reverse these territorial losses. But what happens next also depends on Western decisions, on whether the weapons keep coming, on whether the financial support continues, on whether the sanctions that are driving Russia's federal deficit to crisis levels are maintained or partially lifted in response to Russia's peace performance. Zelensky is not making predictions. He is making choices. Every drone strike on Moscow, every deep operation against Russian energy infrastructure, every domestically produced glide bomb is a choice designed to ensure that what happens next continues the trajectory that produced 29 square miles in 1 week. Russia lost 29 square miles in 7 days. Zelensky knows exactly what happens next, and he is making sure it happens.